"She chose you," the Apache women said to the lonely rancher who saved their wounded sister. The ranch sat far from the town, where the land stretched wide and quiet. Dusty plains met the sky, and the wind moved freely without meeting many walls. This was where the man lived. His name was rarely spoken by others because few people ever came this far. Those who did only knew him as a quiet rancher who minded his own business and helped when help was truly needed. He woke up every morning before the sun rose. The first light of day found him already outside, checking fences, feeding animals, and making sure nothing was broken or missing. His life followed the same pattern every day, not because he loved routine, but because routine kept his thoughts from wandering to places that hurt. He spoke very little, even to himself. Silence had become his closest companion over the years. Long ago, he had imagined a different life. There was once a time when laughter filled his home and dreams felt possible, but loss had changed him. People he loved had left this world too soon, and with them went his desire to stay close to others. After that, he chose land over people, animals over conversations, and work over memories. Out here, the past felt quieter. The townsfolk respected him, even if they did not know him well. They knew he was honest. If a fence broke during a storm, he helped fix it. If an animal wandered off, he helped bring it back. He never asked for payment and never stayed long. Kindness for him was something you did quickly and quietly, without letting it turn into attachment. As the years passed, his hair turned gray and his face grew lined from sun and wind. His hands told the story of a lifetime of hard work. Still, his eyes held a calm strength, shaped by endurance rather than anger. He carried loneliness not like a burden but like an old coat he had grown used to wearing. That evening, the weather changed suddenly. Dark clouds gathered fast and the wind grew sharp and restless. Storms were common in this land, but this one felt heavier, louder, as if the sky itself was unsettled. The rancher secured the animals and checked the barn twice, knowing the storm would not be gentle. Rain fell hard, striking the dry ground with force. Thunder rolled across the plains and lightning lit the sky in short, bright flashes. The rancher stayed inside at first, listening, waiting for the worst to pass. But something about the night made him uneasy. Experience had taught him to trust that feeling. When the rain slowed just enough to allow movement, he stepped outside, pulling his coat tighter around himself. The air was cold, and the smell of wet earth filled his lungs. He walked along the fence line with a lantern, checking for damage. That was when he noticed something dark near the edge of his land, lying where nothing should have been. At first, he thought it was an animal caught in the storm. He moved closer, careful and alert. As the lantern light reached the shape, he froze. It was a person. A woman lay on the ground, soaked from the rain, barely moving. Her clothing was torn and there were signs of injury. The rancher's heart pounded. He had not seen anyone on his land in months, maybe longer. This place was too far for travelers, too quiet for chance meetings. He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance at first. Her breathing was shallow, and her face showed pain and exhaustion. He could see she was Apache by her features and clothing. He knew enough of the land's history to understand what that meant. This was not a simple situation. For a moment, he hesitated. Helping her could bring trouble. There were old tensions, old misunderstandings, and old fears that still lived in these lands. He had spent years avoiding complications, avoiding choices that could pull him back into the world he had left behind. But then the woman stirred slightly, letting out a weak sound that barely rose above the wind. In that moment, his doubt faded. Pain was pain, no matter where it came from. A wounded person was a wounded person. He gently lifted her, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her toward the house. Each step felt heavy, not because of her weight, but because he knew his life had just shifted, even if he did not yet understand how. Inside, he laid her down near the fire and wrapped her in clean blankets. He worked carefully, using skills learned from years of tending to injured animals and neighbors alike. He cleaned her wounds and did what he could to stop the bleeding. He spoke softly, though he did not know if she could hear him. The woman did not speak. Her eyes opened only once, just long enough to look at him. There was fear there, but also something else, relief perhaps. Then she drifted back into unconsciousness. As the storm continued outside, the rancher sat nearby, watching the fire and listening to her breathing. The house, once silent and empty, now felt different, not louder but fuller. A presence had entered his space, and with it came emotions he had buried long ago. He did not sleep that night. He fed the fire, checked her condition, and waited for morning. Thoughts crowded his mind. Who was she? How had she ended up here? Would her people come looking for her? And what would happen when they did? Yet beneath all those questions was another feeling, one he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Purpose. For the first time in a long while, his actions mattered in a way that went beyond routine. When dawn finally arrived, the storm had passed. The land outside looked washed clean, as if the world itself had been given a fresh start. The rancher stepped outside briefly, breathing in the cool air, then returned to the house. The woman was still unconscious, but her breathing was steadier. He nodded to himself, knowing he had done the right thing. Whatever came next, he would face it when it arrived. He had spent years believing his life was meant to be lived alone, quiet and untouched. But that belief had been challenged in a single night. And though he did not yet realize it, the choice he made during the storm would slowly lead him toward a future he never thought he deserved. The silence he once depended on was no longer empty. It was waiting. Morning light slowly filled the small ranch house. The storm clouds were gone, and sunlight slipped through the dusty windows, touching the wooden floor and the quiet walls. The rancher had not slept at all. He sat in a chair near the bed where the wounded woman lay, listening to her breathing and watching for any small movement. Every sound mattered to him now. He stood up carefully and checked her again. Her face was pale, but the bleeding had stopped. The fever he feared did not seem to have come yet. He felt some relief, but he knew the danger was not over. Injuries like hers did not heal quickly, and the desert was not forgiving. He went outside for a moment to finish the morning chores. The animals needed food, and the fences still needed checking after the storm, but his mind stayed inside the house. He worked faster than usual, his eyes often turning toward the door. The land looked calm again, as if nothing unusual had happened. Only he knew how much had changed. When he returned, the woman stirred. Her fingers moved slightly, and a quiet sound escaped her lips. He stepped closer at once. Slowly, her eyes opened. They were dark and alert, filled with confusion and caution. She looked around the room, then her gaze stopped on him. She tried to move, but pain stopped her. A soft sound came from her throat. The rancher raised his hands gently, showing he meant no harm. He spoke in a low, calm voice, using simple words. "You're safe," he said. "Don't try to move. You were hurt." She watched his face closely, as if searching for truth in his expression. She did not answer, but her breathing slowed a little. He brought her water and helped her drink a few small sips. She winced, but accepted the help. They did not share a language well enough for long conversations. He knew only a few words from years of living near the land, and she seemed too weak to speak much anyway. So they relied on small gestures, looks, and patience. Over the next few days, the rancher cared for her quietly. He changed the bandages, kept the fire burning, and made simple food she could eat. He never rushed her, never pushed her to explain anything. He respected her silence, just as he had come to respect his own. The woman watched him often. She noticed how he moved slowly, how he always kept a respectful distance unless necessary. She saw that he turned his back when she needed privacy, and that he never raised his voice. These small things mattered more than words. At night, he slept on a chair near the door, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. Sometimes he woke to find her awake, looking toward the window or the fire. In those moments, there was a quiet understanding between them. Two people shaped by loss, sitting in the same silence. As her strength slowly returned, she began to speak a little. She shared her name and a few details about where she came from. She had been traveling when she was injured, caught in a dangerous situation she did not wish to fully explain. The rancher did not press for answers. He knew some stories were meant to be shared only when the time was right. In return, he shared little about himself. Just that he lived alone, that the land was his responsibility, and that he had learned to survive with what he had. She listened carefully, her eyes thoughtful. It was clear she was used to reading people, not just hearing them. One afternoon, as she rested, distant movement caught the rancher's attention. From the edge of the land, he saw figures approaching. They moved with purpose, not like lost travelers. His heart tightened. He knew who they were before they came close. Apache women stepped onto his land, their expressions serious and alert. They did not carry fear, but they carried strength. He stood outside to meet them, keeping his hands visible and his posture calm. They spoke to him firmly but without anger. They were searching for their sister who had gone missing after being injured. The rancher nodded slowly. He told them she was alive and being cared for. At those words, the tension shifted slightly, but their eyes stayed sharp. They followed him inside. The moment they saw her, their faces changed. Relief washed over them, mixed with emotion too deep for words. They moved to her side, speaking softly to her, touching her hands and face. The wounded woman's eyes filled with tears. She reached for them weakly, and they held her carefully. The rancher stepped back, giving them space. He watched quietly as they checked her injuries and spoke among themselves. They noticed the clean bandages, the warmth of the fire, and the care taken in the small room. Nothing had been done without thought. One of the women turned toward him and studied him closely, not with suspicion but with judgment. She asked him questions, what he had done, how he found her, how long she had been here. He answered honestly, keeping his voice steady. There was a long silence after that. The women exchanged looks. The rancher felt the weight of that moment. He expected questions about why he helped or warnings about crossing boundaries. Instead, one of them nodded slightly. "You treated her with respect," she said. That was all, but it meant more than a long speech. They decided their sister was still too weak to move. For now, she would stay. The rancher agreed without hesitation. He did not ask for anything in return. He only asked that they tell him what she needed and how he could help. Days passed with the ranch house fuller than it had ever been. The Apache women came and went, bringing herbs, food, and knowledge. They worked together quietly, united by care. The rancher learned by watching, listening, and doing exactly as told. The wounded woman grew stronger. She could sit up now, walk a little with help, and even smile at times. Her laughter was soft but real, and when it appeared, it filled the room with warmth. She and the rancher spent time talking in simple ways. Sometimes she taught him words from her language. Sometimes they shared stories through gestures and short sentences. Trust grew slowly, like something planted carefully in dry soil. At night, when the others rested, she often looked at him with a thoughtful expression. There was gratitude there, but also curiosity. She was trying to understand him, just as he was trying to understand her. The rancher felt changes within himself he could not name. He was more aware of time, more aware of life beyond routine. He found himself thinking ahead, imagining days not shaped only by work and silence. He knew the women were watching him, not closely, but carefully. They noticed how he never tried to take control, how he always asked before acting. They saw how their sister trusted him, how she relaxed when he was near. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in soft gold, the wounded woman sat outside with him. The wind was gentle, and the land felt peaceful. She looked at him and said quietly, "You did not have to help me." He nodded. "I know." She studied his face for a long moment, then said something softly in her language. He did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling behind them. In that moment, the rancher realized this was no longer just about saving someone during a storm. Something deeper was forming, something built on choice, respect, and quiet courage. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he knew one thing for certain. His life was no longer his alone. The days that followed brought a quiet change to the ranch. It no longer felt like a place frozen in time. There was movement now, soft voices, and shared work. The Apache women stayed nearby, setting up a small camp not far from the house. They came and went with purpose, always checking on their sister, always aware of the land around them. The rancher felt their presence even when they were not inside the house. He knew he was being observed, not in a threatening way, but in a careful one. Every action mattered. How he spoke, how he waited, how he listened. He understood this without anyone having to explain it to him. One morning, as he prepared food, two of the women entered quietly. They did not interrupt him. They watched how he moved, how he kept his hands clean, how he measured portions so their sister would not be overwhelmed. When he finished, he stepped back and let them decide what was best. That simple act spoke louder than words. Later that day, they asked him to sit with them outside. The air was warm and the land stretched endlessly around them. The rancher sat where they pointed, keeping his posture open and calm. He did not try to fill the silence. He had learned long ago that silence could be a form of respect. They began asking questions, not sharply but steadily, about his past, why he lived alone, why he chose this land. He answered honestly but simply. He spoke of loss without details, of mistakes without excuses, of a life shaped by choices he could not undo. He did not ask for sympathy, and he did not hide behind pride. The women listened closely. They had heard many stories in their lives, and they knew when someone spoke from truth rather than performance. One of them asked him why he had helped their sister when he knew it might bring difficulty. He looked down at his hands for a moment before answering. Then he said, "Because leaving her would have stayed with me longer than any trouble." That answer stayed with them. As the sun moved across the sky, the conversation shifted. They spoke about their sister, about her strength, her responsibilities, and the weight she carried. They explained that she was not someone who trusted easily. She had learned caution early in life. To see her calm in his presence meant something. Inside the house, the woman rested, but she was awake. She could hear faint voices through the open window. She knew what was happening without being told. Her sisters were deciding, not just about her recovery, but about the man who had entered her life during her most vulnerable moment. When the rancher returned inside, she looked at him carefully. "They ask many things," she said softly. He nodded. "They should." She studied him for a long moment. "You are not afraid." "I am," he answered. "But fear does not decide everything." That made her smile just a little. As her strength improved, she began helping in small ways. She swept the floor slowly, sorted herbs, and sat outside during the cooler hours. The rancher never stopped her unless he saw strain. He trusted her to know her limits, just as she trusted him to step in when needed. They talked more now. About the land, the weather, and small memories. She spoke of her childhood, of learning to read the wind and the ground. He spoke of learning to listen to animals, of understanding storms before they arrived. They discovered a shared respect for patience and observation. The Apache women noticed these moments. They saw how the two sat side by side without pressure, how no one tried to lead, how choices were made quietly together. This was not a connection built on words alone, but on behavior repeated day after day. One evening, a disagreement arose. One of the women believed it was time to move their sister, to bring her back to familiar land. Another felt she still needed rest. The discussion was calm but firm. The rancher listened, understanding the importance of the decision, yet knowing it was not his place to influence it. When asked for his opinion, he paused. "I will support what she needs," he said, "not what is easiest for me." They looked at him closely then. That answer mattered. The injured woman was asked what she wanted. She did not respond right away. She looked around the room at the fire, the walls, the quiet care that surrounded her. Then she looked at the rancher. "I am healing here," she said, "my body and my heart." The words were simple, but their meaning was heavy. The women did not react immediately. They respected her voice. After a moment, they agreed to wait longer. That night, the rancher sat outside alone, staring at the stars. He felt the weight of what was happening. He was not blind to it. He knew lines were being crossed, not in a careless way, but in a meaningful one. He questioned whether he was worthy of the trust being placed in him. The next day, the women approached him again. This time, their tone was different, less questioning, more direct. They spoke of responsibility, of what it meant to be chosen by trust rather than demand. They explained that actions carried consequences, not just for individuals but for families and communities. He listened carefully. "I understand," he said, "and I will not take lightly what has been given." That was enough for now. The woman continued to recover. Her laughter returned more often. Her steps grew steadier. And with each small improvement, her presence became less about healing and more about living. She and the rancher shared meals outside, watching the land change color with the day. Sometimes they spoke about the future, sometimes they did not. There was no rush, no pressure, just awareness. The Apache women watched from a distance. They saw no signs of control, no sense of ownership. They saw choice being honored again and again. One afternoon, as the wind moved gently through the grass, one of the women stood beside the rancher. "You are not trying to keep her," she said. He shook his head. "I would never try to hold someone who does not wish to stay," she nodded slowly. "That is why she feels safe." Those words stayed with him long after she walked away. The land seemed to respond to the change as well. The ranch felt lighter. The silence was no longer heavy. It was shared. By the end of that week, the understanding was clear. This was no longer a simple act of kindness followed by gratitude. It was a meeting of lives shaped by choice, patience, and respect. The rancher did not know what the women would decide next. He did not know what the future would bring, but he knew this moment mattered, not because it promised something easy, but because it asked something real. And for the first time in many years, he did not step away from that truth. The morning came quietly, with soft light spreading across the land. The air felt calm, but something deeper had shifted. The rancher sensed it as soon as he stepped outside. The Apache women were already awake, standing together near their camp. They were speaking in low voices, their expressions thoughtful and serious. Inside the house, the woman sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket. She was stronger now. The pain no longer ruled her movements, though it still reminded her to be careful. She watched the land with steady eyes, as if she was listening to something others could not hear. The rancher brought her breakfast and placed it gently on the table. He noticed how naturally this act came to him now. There was no hesitation, no feeling of intrusion. It was simply care offered freely. She looked at him and said, "They will speak today." He nodded. "I know." Neither of them said more. They both understood what this meant. Decisions were close, not rushed but ready. Later that morning, the Apache women entered the house together. Their steps were calm, their presence strong. They greeted the rancher with respectful nods. One of them looked at their sister first, checking her condition with a careful eye. Seeing her well, she turned toward the rancher. "Sit with us," she said. They gathered outside under the open sky. The land stretched endlessly around them, silent and honest. The rancher sat where they asked, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He did not speak first. One of the women began. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She talked about trust, about how it was not given easily and never taken back lightly. She spoke of their people's way of watching actions instead of listening only to words. "You have been watched," she said plainly. The rancher nodded. "I know." Another woman spoke next. She said they had seen how he treated their sister when she could give nothing in return. how he never asked questions he did not need answers to, how he stepped back when stepping forward would have been easier. "These things matter," she said. There was a pause. The wind moved softly through the grass. Then the oldest of the women spoke. Her voice was steady, carrying weight. She looked directly at the rancher and said the words that changed everything. "She chose you." The rancher felt his breath catch. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single sentence. He had not expected it to be spoken so clearly, so openly. "She trusted you when she was weak," the woman continued. "She stayed when she could have left. She heals here not only because of the land, but because of you." The rancher lowered his head slightly, overwhelmed. "I never asked for that," he said quietly. "And that is why it happened," she replied. The woman herself stepped forward then. She stood beside him, not behind, not ahead. Her presence was calm, grounded. "I chose safety," she said. "I chose respect. I chose peace." The rancher looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion he did not try to hide. "I don't know if I am enough," he said honestly. She met his gaze. "You do not need to be more than what you are." The Apache women watched closely. This moment was not about approval alone. It was about understanding responsibility. One of them spoke again, explaining that choice came with weight. That trust meant care over time, not just in moments of crisis. The rancher listened without defense. "I understand," he said. "And I will honor that choice every day, or I will step aside if asked." That answer settled something between them. The days that followed were quiet but full. The decision had been spoken, but life still moved gently. The Apache women stayed longer, watching how things unfolded now that the truth was open. The rancher did not change who he was. He did not suddenly speak more or act differently. He continued to listen, to wait, to offer care without ownership. That consistency mattered more than any promise. The woman began walking farther each day, exploring the land slowly. The rancher often walked beside her, matching her pace. They talked about small things, clouds, birds, the way the light changed near evening. These simple moments built something strong. One afternoon they sat together near the fence where he had found her that night. She looked at the ground thoughtfully. "This place remembers," she said. He nodded. "So do I," she smiled softly. The Apache women gathered that evening. They spoke among themselves, then turned to the rancher. "We will leave soon," one said. "Our sister is well, and her path is clear." The rancher felt both relief and sadness. He had grown used to their presence, to their strength filling the land, but he respected their choice. When the day came, they prepared to leave. There were no long speeches, just shared looks, gentle touches, and quiet understanding. One by one, they thanked the rancher. Not with grand words, but with sincerity. Before they left, the oldest woman stepped close to him. "Remember," she said, "this was not given, it was chosen." "I know," he replied. After they were gone, the ranch felt different again, not empty but focused. The woman remained, standing beside the rancher as they watched the horizon. "You could still leave," he said softly. She looked at him. "I stay because I want to." That night they shared a meal in comfortable silence. The fire burned low, steady and warm. There was no rush, no expectation placed on the future. The rancher lay awake later, listening to the familiar sounds of the night. But his thoughts were no longer heavy. He felt something he had not felt in years, peace that did not come from being alone. He understood now that love, in its truest form, was not loud or demanding. It was quiet, patient, and chosen again each day. And in that understanding, he rested. The days after the Apache women left passed gently, like a slow river that no longer rushed against sharp stones. The ranch returned to its quiet ways, but it was no longer empty. The silence felt different now. It was shared, not lonely. The rancher noticed this most in the mornings when he woke and heard movement in the house that was not his own. She rose early, just like him. Sometimes she was already outside, standing near the fence, watching the light spread across the land. Other times she waited inside, warming water or preparing a simple meal. They moved around each other easily, without confusion or tension. There was no need to explain what felt natural. The woman grew stronger with each passing day. Her steps became steady, her hands sure. She began helping more with the daily work, not because she was asked, but because she wanted to. The rancher watched carefully, stepping in when needed, stepping back when not. This balance mattered to both of them. They spoke often now, though still not endlessly. Their conversations stayed simple and honest. They talked about the land, the seasons, and the kind of life that grows slowly, built by patience. Sometimes they spoke about the past, but only in small pieces. Neither tried to uncover everything at once. They understood that some memories needed time. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sky turn orange and gold, she spoke softly. "I could return to my people." He nodded, his chest tightening though his face stayed calm. "I know." She looked at him carefully. "Would you ask me to stay?" He shook his head slowly. "I would never ask you to give up your choice." She smiled then, not because the answer surprised her, but because it confirmed what she already knew. "That is why I stay." From that day on, the decision was no longer something spoken aloud. It lived quietly in their actions. She stayed because she wanted to. He welcomed her without trying to hold her. The land itself seemed to respond. The animals grew used to her presence. The house felt warmer. Even the nights felt softer, less heavy with old memories. The rancher found himself laughing sometimes, caught off guard by the sound. It startled him at first, then slowly became familiar. The woman brought pieces of her world into his. She showed him how to prepare certain foods using herbs from the land. She taught him words from her language, and he practiced them carefully, respecting their meaning. In return, he showed her how to care for the animals, how to read the weather signs he had learned over years of observation. They learned from each other without trying to change one another. People from the nearby town noticed the change before he did. When the rancher came to trade supplies, he stood taller. His eyes carried warmth instead of distance. When asked questions, he answered politely but kept what was private untouched. Some people were curious. Some were cautious. He did not explain. He did not feel the need to. The life he was building did not require approval. Seasons changed. The heat of summer softened into cooler days. The land shifted colors and the work shifted with it. They faced challenges together, small ones and larger ones. A broken fence, a sick animal, a long night of worry followed by a quiet morning of relief. Through it all, trust deepened. One night, as rain fell softly outside, the woman sat near the fire and spoke of her sisters. She missed them, she said, but she did not feel torn. Her connection to them remained strong, even from a distance. "They know where I am," she said. "And they know why," he nodded. "They are welcome here," she smiled. "I know." Time continued its steady march. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden changes, and yet everything had changed. The rancher no longer lived just for routine. He planned ahead now. He repaired the house not just for himself, but for a shared future. He planted more than he needed, thinking of seasons to come. He listened more closely to the world because he knew someone else was listening too. The woman found peace in the rhythm of the ranch. She carried her strength quietly, grounding the space around her. She did not lose herself by staying. Instead, she grew. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, she stopped and looked at him. "Do you ever regret helping me that night?" He did not need to think. "No." Even knowing it changed everything, he smiled softly, especially because it did. As the years passed, their life became something steady and real, not perfect, not without difficulty, but honest, built on choice made again and again. Sometimes visitors came. Sometimes her people passed nearby, stopping to share news and warmth. Each visit reinforced the bond rather than weakening it. Respect moved in both directions. The ranch became known as a place of quiet welcome, a place where people were treated with dignity. The rancher's kindness, once hidden behind distance, now flowed freely, shaped by wisdom rather than fear. In the evenings, they often sat together under the stars. The woman would rest her hand near his, sometimes touching, sometimes not. There was no urgency. No need to define what did not need defining. One night, as the wind moved gently through the grass, she said, "You were not lonely because you were alone. You were lonely because you believed you had nothing left to give." He considered her words carefully. Then he nodded. "You reminded me," she smiled. "No, you remembered on your own." As time went on, the rancher's hair grew whiter and the lines on his face deepened. The woman aged too, though her strength never faded. Together, they faced life's changes with quiet courage. When the rancher thought back to the storm that had brought her to his land, it no longer felt like an interruption. It felt like an answer. He had believed his life was already written, that the rest of his days would pass quietly, untouched. But one act of compassion had opened a door he did not know was still there. And beyond that door, he found not just companionship, but meaning. The land continued to stretch wide and open beneath the sky. The ranch stood firm against time and weather. And within it lived two people who had chosen one another without force, without fear, and without regret. The story of their lives did not need to be told loudly. It lived in daily acts, shared silences, and the steady understanding that some bonds are formed not by words, but by choices made when no one is watching. And that was enough.